to have everybody here this morning, and really looking forward to this discussion with Dr. Netra Chhetri. Netra is a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation Society at ASU, and he is the director of the Innovation and Global Development PhD program and the Center for Innovation and Global Development here at ASU. And he spent the last 2 decades working with smallholder farmers and others around the world on figuring out how to drive bottom-up grassroots innovation. And so really great opportunity to have him join us this morning and talk to us about that. So Netra, it's all yours.
Thank you, Clark. I'll take it from here. Good morning, everybody. Those of you who made it live here, thank you very much. And then those who will be watching later on at their comfort time, welcome to what I'm going to talk about today with regards to kind of approaches that can be useful in community development, particularly the methodological dimensions of it. You know, Clark used the word grassroots innovation. You know, it is quite a powerful word in some fashion, but if we do not take it seriously, there is every chances that it can be derailed by snobbish academics and development practitioners to make it something different than what it is ought to be. Okay, so for me, you know, grassroots innovation is not just about innovation of some kind of a technology. It is also about innovations of some sort of local level policies or local institutions, such as you may be aware, in many parts of the world, we have got a mothers group. You know, these are community-based groups exclusively formed by the mothers to counteract the oppression that is being historically there for them, either by man or institutions that are supposed to be helping them. Likewise, in many parts of the world, there are what is called community forestry user groups, especially most dominant in South Asia. These are also sort of a grassroots level community-based organizations designed or established to protect the forest, because the condition of the forest is going to impact the livelihood of those communities because they depend on them. In many parts of the world, there are what is called, here in the US too, there are these farmers managed irrigation systems. These are small scale irrigation systems that are exclusively managed by farmers. These farmers have their set of rules. They punish people who violate the rules and so on. They do not follow state laws and things like that, because these farmers managed irrigation systems were well before any state started to form laws and policies around governing the water. Similarly, there are a lot of technological innovations. You know, I'm going to walk you through some of them. Technologies to actually save the seeds in the community, technologies to harness the water in the water scarce communities, and so on are there as well. So, you know, while it is good to identify these community-based both institutions and technology as a grassroots innovation, but if we fail to engage the very communities as an outsiders to talk about and to enhance these technologies or support these technologies, we're going to then find out a few years later that we are replacing these very technologies and these very organizations by something else from outside. even if the intent may not be ill in this case, but the outcome may not be that great. That's why it's really, really important to understand what is out there at the community level. So that's what I'm going to talk to you today for the next 50 or so minutes. I wish we can do a little bit of a dialectic or a conversational things, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to throw quite a few questions to you. But let me start by asking you a very fundamental question, that is, why do we collect data? Can anybody help me understand this? Those of you who are here. Yeah, Lori, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we collect data so that we can make informed decisions.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else? We can make informed decisions. Patrick, do you have options to unmute yourself?
Yes, Prof. Good morning.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Well,
make it very short.
Right. I do agree with that. It helps you to make informed decisions, but it also can be used to really get a good feel of what is happening at the local level, which is very important. While it helps you to make informed decisions, knowing exactly what's happening on the ground, there are lots of things that goes beyond just decisions that you
stop there. Brendan, do you have the options to unmute yourself? Let me ask you another question, Brendan. If you can unmute there, and I'm going to ask you a question here. What kind of data makes sense for a community development project? Either Brendan or Arthur, or if both of you are unable to unmute, maybe Brianne. Whoever wants to go, three of you, I can see you in my screen. Let me repeat the question. What kind of data makes sense for a community development project?
The use of resources.
So again, say again.
The use of resources.
The use of resources, great. What else, Arthur? Brianne?
I think it depends on what you're trying to get at.
Depends on what you're trying to get out. Okay, use of resources is certainly one. When we say resources, we can think about natural resources or human resources, and any other forms of resources as well. Okay, so it depends what is the product. So let me move on to one more thing here. Okay, everybody probably see this picture, and you may have seen this live in your life as well, especially those of you from South Asia and Africa and so on. Okay, so Brandon rightfully suggested earlier that use of the resources. This is a forest with a rhino. Okay, the resources, some of the resources from this forest is also used by the community nearby. And those resources include grass, firewood, timber, medicinal plants, herbs, and so on. The grass is also used by the rhinos. Okay, so if you are a community development worker and your job is to now think about the harmony of this wild animal, which is one of the endangered species, and the community, what is the kind of data that you want to collect here? Iftikhar, do you want to share anything?
So we should be collecting the data on what all resources are available and how and if those resources are being equitably used by all those who need those resources.
Okay, so let's say, there is a competition in the grass that the rhino eats and the cattle and the human beings collect from the forest.
So the first thing is that we should be collecting the data who all need how much, how many, or what all proportion of the resources, total available resources, and also what proportions are being used by each.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. What proportion of it is going to be used by each of them? Ryan, is that going to be sufficient?
Sorry?
Is that going to be sufficient? I'm asking Ryan.
Okay.
No, it isn't.
Okay, what else do we need to add? What kind of data then we need to add on top of that? Let's say let's put up sort of a fine word, that development workers want to use. Let's say the inventory of the resources. Let's say Iftikhar said that we have to inventorize what are the resources there in this forest. Okay, so I'm asking Ryan now, is that going to be sufficient? The inventory of the resources is going to be sufficient?
No, because we also need to know the relationship between the resources.
Relationship between the resources, right? In some cases, there might not be that relationship between human use of the resources and the use of the resources by the animals too. Okay, so who use what resources? Inventory and who is what resources? Is that going to be sufficient, Derek?
We also need to collect the data, the rate at which those resources get depleted by external factors.
Yeah, we need some kind of information, the way those resources have been used and at what rate it has been replenished. If the rate of replenishment is less than the rate of use, one day we will find ourselves that there are no more resources. Okay, that's really, really fantastic sort of a contribution. Angel, is that going to be enough, or did we collect all the necessary data, or there is something is still missing here?
Hello, everyone. I think it will also depend on what type of knowledge we want to get out of that, because that then will put to us to look into maybe other types of data, not just resources. Yeah.
What kind of knowledge do we have around each resources? Okay, so we can actually go on have a dissertation on this, folks. It's really, really rich areas. But by chiming in here in the last 5 or so minutes, what you have in a way indicated to me that some of the data can be categorized as a quantitative data, and some of the data can be put into sort of a qualitative realms. For example, the quality of the resources is not, it can be quantified, but it's very difficult to get it directly firsthand in the quantitative forms. That requires some sort of a qualitative assessment of these resources. Okay, so let me continue. I would have loved to see you face to face, sitting in a forest like this and thinking really, really hard about what is that we need to collect in order to create a harmony between the forest the wild animals and the community. These are really, really chronic development challenges that we have faced in most of the world, including the Western world as well. There's always a tension between the wild animals and the human beings, because we are fighting for the same resources without understanding each of our needs and so on, and then we're failing to create the harmony between these things. Okay, so let me move on here. So in this particular area, that I've been working here in this community for about 2 decades, a little bit around that time. People, in this case, largely women, goes to the forest, to collect fodders. And they go to the forest to collect the fodder largely during the dry seasons. That is the time they do not have plentiful supply of grasses coming from their agricultural land. Okay. Since it is a dry season, that also means these resources are not much in a plentiful supply in the forest too. That is also an indication that the rhinos and other wild animals who depends on this forest are going to compete with the same resources. When man or human beings and these animals compete for the same resources, and then there is a tension between the two living creatures here. And we have found out that these tensions are largely affecting a certain group of people more than the other group of people. And this certain group of people are A, women, and B, relatively poorer because they cannot afford to have other sources to meet their need of the livestock that they have. Okay, so in the process of data collection, it's not just enough to have the inventory of the resources. We also need to have human dimensions about the use of the resources, who actually use them, and then how do they use them? Is there a seasonality to it? And then if there are particular competition going on between the use of the resources within a human being and between human and the non-human beings and so on. And then how those resources have been faring over a period of time. That's going to be really, really critically important. Remember, seasonality, who is using them most dominantly? What will happen if those resources are not there to wild animals and to the human beings? That's one part of it. The entirely different part I'm going to come later on is that the use of the forest directly for human beings. In this case, this woman is collecting firewood from the forest. Again, if the condition of the forest deteriorates, from these two images alone, that what we have found is it affects first the women, because they are the primary people in the community who rely or who interact continuously with the forest for their livelihood in order to maintain either their animals, keep their animals alive and well fed, or run the kitchen. Okay. So on top of that, I think Brandon or somebody earlier said to me that the overall condition of resources. Well, resources, not just tree and so on. If you carefully look at any ecosystem, particularly the forest system, what you will find out is the wetland. The wetland are the heart of a forest ecosystem. In this particular case, during the winter seasons, it brings a lot of migrating birds. It attracts a lot of migrating birds to these wetlands. So this is a winter refuge for those birds. And it's also a habitat or a place for all the wild animals, in the case of rhino, to go to these wetlands and wallow. And that's how they treat some of their skin diseases as well, naturally. And if it's a tiger, and this is a place to go and drink waters and so on. So among other things, it is also important to understand what resources are where and what are the conditions of each of these resources. With changing climate, what we have found is that there is a competition for water. The communities nearby these forests are withdrawing water from the underground. You know, this is the part of the northern Ganges in South Asia. You know, so the communities are heavily extracting groundwater to cope with or to increase the resiliency of their agriculture system, because the rainfall has been unpredictable lately. But the effect of that is directly now beginning to see in a nearby wetlands. These wetlands are now drying. Okay, so if you are really thinking about harmony of the community and the forest and these animals, we really have to think of collecting data at the system level. That is where we largely fail ourselves. If I am an engineer, I tend to collect the data that matters to me. And if I am an agriculturist, I tend to collect the data about the crops and so on. If I'm a forester, I tend to collect the data around forest species and so on. We never look at the interrelationship between these natural resources and the activities that are happening in the forest and this sort of a reciprocal relationship between these things. So the bottom left-hand side, we saw a problem that wetland was drying, and the local community then decided to actually make a dam so that during the run-up season, during the monsoon seasons, which starts in first week of June, goes all the way to mid-September in this particular area. So during that monsoon time, when there's a heavy precipitation, the runoff is now arrested and collected in these traditional ponds. So that is sort of an introduction of technology or engineering solutions in order to solve the problem temporarily. But what I have been telling all of these community members lately is that, okay, again, think at the larger system level, the groundwater, the forest, the agriculture systems, and the relationship between all of that is critically important. If we continue to over-extract the groundwater, no matter how many dams that we built in, one day we will find ourselves, these lakes are getting drier, okay? So it is easy to say, okay, we got to collect data on resources. That is great, but we really have to go beyond that, think at the system level. And at the community level, what you end up find out is that, you know, most often, and I'm sure you have done this a couple of times, if not a whole lot of times, you know, if we see a lake drying like this, if we see a rhino on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side of the pictures, getting thin or dying. And if we see the invasive species on the top left and the right hand sides invading the forest, generally the blame goes to community members, local members. We see them as the user of these resources, and we see them not protecting their resources. You know, if I am a farmer and if my livelihood is dependent on managing all of those resources, it is in my interest to protect them. Okay, that's why rather than blaming farmers, we can learn a great deal of, or we can uncover a great deal of knowledge if we sit down with them, how have they been managing these resources historically, and what may have happened in the recent time for them not to be able to manage this. You know, this top right and left pictures are really, really important. These two are a nasty invasive species. Most of the South Asian, probably now Africans probably know too. And the top right is the lantana. Here in Arizona, we keep that ornament, but in the other part of the world is one of the top invasive species. On the left, top left-hand side is the Mycanian, okay, which is another aggressive invasive species. And then they are choking the forest. Literally, they are choking the forest. And by doing that, they are destroying the habitat of the wild animals as well as the livestock that depends on this forest, plus the human beings. So in the process of collecting data, we have to be really, really thinking at the comprehensive way. Let's just put it there that way, and then let me move on. You know, it's often overlooked in sort of a development space, but it's coming up really, really rapidly and in a very different way. What is known as a participatory resource mapping. This community is sitting there. They are engaging in mapping all of those resources, where they go to collect water, where do they go to see whether their irrigation dam is intact or not, or the source of irrigation water, where do they go to collect their forests, and where do they go to collect grasses. And so all kind of resources, including their schools, health posts, roads, staff, and all of those things are collected by engaging the communities. You know, we can do that without engaging community. We can collect all of that, but by engaging them, we are achieving quite a few other things here. One, we are building on their knowledges, which is critically important if we want to sustain any project. Number two, by engaging them in a way, we are empowering these people. You may have seen only men doing there, but we have a similar group of women working on their own. So we can have men making the resource map that matters to them, and women making the resources map for the same area that matters to them. We can superimpose them and find out very different sort of a resource map. This is, some put this as a sort of a quantitative side, but I try to put it on a qualitative side. Once you collect the quantitative informations and you sit down in the community, then also put a qualitative bent to it, and then find out where things are, how those things interact to each other's and the community, and so on. You know, does anybody have any questions or want to add in this, up to this point? I'm going to make a transition to something else. Anybody chime in, unmute yourself and you can shout.
Hi, Professor Netra.
Anybody who makes the comment, make it short.
Hi, Professor. Jomo here. A key message so far is that there needs to be sustainable use of the resources. There must be consideration for tomorrow, next year, 10 years down the road. We cannot overexploit the forest and the community resources. I think that's the key message for me so far.
That's okay. That's probably not the key message for me, but then you got it that way. That's great. Ryan, you want to chime in?
Sure, it's the relationship between data points that matters, because otherwise you're just analyzing data in isolation. You're not going to be able to make any decisions with that.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Wilburn, do you want to chime in? Okay, Brendan, do you want to add anything here? What is that we got as of this point? Jomo thinks the message is abundantly clear about the sustainability, whereas Ryan thinks there's multiple data points that we have to think about them in relational terms. And Brendan, do you get anything different than that? Or if you are thinking maybe, yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
I don't have anything.
Okay, Iftikhar.
I was just going to say quickly that in order to make decisions about the future, or even to have a sustainable future, you have to have data.
You have to have data. Okay. Well, that is probably more or less clear, but don't we have enough data in the world right now, Iftikhar? And why do we need more data?
It needs to be relevant in the right structure. It's not
in the right
just not just about it. Yeah.
Okay. It's not. Well, what I'm going to argue and more with some sort of emphasis is that data that is created without engaging the rightful users of the outcomes of that data, then it might not be such a great data, or it might not make a significant dent in the community development project. Okay. And nobody needs to convince anybody about the need of the data. But the point is, what kind of a data and how do we collect that data? You know, I actually began my professional life by collecting data. That was the very first job that I did. And the very place that I went there to collect the data hasn't been changed. In fact, it has, to my surprise and then to my shock and to my sadness, it has. So lessons that I have is it's not about data, but it's about the nature of data and the nature by which the data collected, whether the data that is collected actually makes sense or not. So I saw a couple of people raising hand here. I think you can go by yourself. I don't see the hand in my screen, but then there is a text message coming up on mine. So who is raising the hand? Go ahead, please. Unmute and say.
Okay, I was about to talk into what you asked about resources. Where I was, I wanted to argue or comment that when we know we have data about resources, we can even plan alternatives. If the resources cannot last in time, what alternatives we can use in terms of keeping the resources to last for us.
Exactly.
As we know
That's,
our information. Yeah.
That's a really, really good point. So if I am an economist, I can use the fancy term, but I don't want to use that, but I'll try to simplify that term. If some resources are depleting in the data collection process, we found out that resources TKZ, whatever that means, are now depleting. And if we allow that to happen continuously, that might have negative consequences in the community as well as in the ecosystem where the resources are. So the point here is, are there any substitutes for those resources? Can we actually let the resources come back by using something else? Okay, so that's going to be really, really important. Are there any substitute that we can use so that the resource in question that is depleting now can come back? Okay, I think Renee or Brendan, do you want to say something? You probably were the two who raised the hand earlier. If you don't have to say, I can move on. Thank you, folks. Go to participate. The community development is all about engagement and participation. If you are just expecting me to shout at you all the time, then you are not a right kind of a community development worker, or you will not be right kind of it. I will tell you right now. Okay, Magdalene, or how do I don't know? I may have pronounced absolutely corrupt way. Do you want to say something? I think you were raising hand, or Renee?
No, I've spoken already.
Okay, great then. Let me then move on. Okay.
Okay, Netra, it was me. Sorry, I was Angel.
Okay.
So I just wanted to say that on the data that we need data that is usable and manageable and can be comprehended by the people who is going to use it and who is dealing with the issues.
Okay.
Because we can this is seen many times in Puerto Rico, but also in other places in the world, that technological solutions often comes with difficult data to understand. And then we need to develop also the capacity to use that data, and that is important.
So thank you, thank you very much. So that capacity development part, if it's done right, that might yield a fancy product like this. Okay, although this is a GIS map, but these kind of a GIS map can also be produced. There's what is called participatory GIS mapping. You can use the community members, give all the gadgets that you have, and you can come up with precisely this kind of a map. And thank you, Angel, using the word capacity building. If you reflect back on my very first slides with the rhino and the forest and the discussion that we're having until this point, if everything is done gradually and step by step by engaging community members in every step, we can certainly produce a well-inventorized map like this. This can be a very first tool for our development practitioners to use, to think about the relationship between resources and the community in questions, the conditions of the resources, conditions of the community, and so on. And along the way, you can also think about what is the kind of interventions that probably are warranted so that these resources can be sustainably harnessed in the future and going forward without jeopardizing anybody's well-being and livelihood. Okay, so let me move on to another part of it. So I'm leaving the forest now and then exclusively moving into the agricultural space. So let me, well, you probably are quite tired at this point in time with me, but let me ask you a question again. If you want to co-generate high impact development program to smallholder farmers, where do you start? You are really, really worried about food security of the community that you are working, and then you are stressed. You have seen hunger firsthand, and your human side kicks in, and you want to do something. You want to do something really, really meaningful and impactful in that community. Where do you want to start? It's a sort of a very open-ended question, but I'm sure you can help here. Anybody?
Can I say, I think you want to start by, by understanding the problem, the cause of the problem, maybe speaking to the people on the ground and, establishing why it is, or what in their eyes is the cause or the reason why they're in such a position or such a state.
Okay. Cause, the causality, that the causes that are creating the condition of hunger. Okay. What else? Folks, go ahead before I pull the name.
So you need to, yes, Iftikhar. We need to understand. We need to understand where does that community stand today. Where does the community stand? Where does that community stand today?
What do you can you expand that a little bit, Iftikhar?
Yes. For example, like in this field of energy, if I want to understand, like if I want to actually understand where to start, then I also need to know where the target community for which I am working. I'm the small holder, as you are naming in case of the crops. So the lowest, the people at the lowest tier of the energy supply, where do they stand today? How much energy do they have? What is the quality of energy that they are being provided with? Whether they can really afford it or not? How are they struggling to actually like muster that energy and use it? And what all is like the wastage of their energy and effort in use of that energy?
Okay. Renee, do you want to add anything? Unmute. I saw you unmute earlier.
I also want to be able to find out what skills and resources are available to the community itself, which can be optimized or improved upon so that they become partners in solving their own problems.
Okay, good. What are the resources to the community? Okay, well, we are academics. We like to use sort of a fancy word here. It's always also good to deconstruct some of these words. Okay, but before I go, someone raised the hand. Do you want to add anything? I think it was Mugli.
Yeah. I wanted to also add that first I will find the need. What is the need? And when I found the need, why the need is not met. And if why the need is not met, then how then I will be seeing the capacity. Are they not able to do it, or they lack capacity, or what? The first thing is to know the need and why the need is not met.
Okay.
It's where I'll be starting.
Thank you. Well, what you have seen, with the interest of time, I'm just going to move on as well. Another great topic to sit down and talk. I call this as a process. This is a process by which we generate a lot of good information and then we process those informations to make best use of it. Okay, what you have seen here is the combination of social, technical, and ecological system working together. This is a rice-based ecosystem where the rice is the major and staple crop. But then the rice-based system cannot happen in the absence of the social systems. I mean, a successful rice-based system also need technological support of some kind. What you have seen here is a lady and the rice and a solar panel, okay? So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we have been collecting as a data, but not that is enough, but that is the beginning of our long journey. We've been working in this area for the last 4 years. I haven't been there since the COVID, but planning to go there sometime in December and January to see what is now there. But we do collect local level data even nowadays as well. Okay, so like Iftikars and all of you invariably suggested that what is that available there and what can be done. And we did about the same thing. And this was the community dependent heavily on rainfall. And in the recent decades, the rainfall has been quite unpredictable and very variable. It sometimes comes, sometimes it doesn't come. And, community were quite worried about their crop as they were failing repeatedly for the last few years. And they approached one of the NGOs, and the NGOs then approached us about what is that we can do collectively. And we said, okay, at that time, the solar panel were beginning to come in this part of the world as well. And we thought, okay, how deep is the groundwater? And in this particular location, we found out that the groundwater is situated about 150 feet from the surface. So it's quite deep. And then that information was uncovered by talking with the geologists in the area. Then we went to the engineers, local engineering firms, and then talk about what is that possible to use the solar panels to lift the water from the ground and to use for irrigation, because there were no streams nearby. Okay, so, and then we went to the community. Okay, there is a possibility that we can pool the water, but are you guys interested to put some money? Because it is a development project, you have to contribute. In the beginning, they were all hoping that we were going to give them all kinds of technologies, but I had the lessons from my previous development works. I'm one of that persons in the world always advocate for participation of the community, even financial participation. No matter how poor the community is, they can pitch in a little bit of the cash. So these people argued us for a free solar panel and everything free. And then on the other hand, I sat down there, okay, if you are asking for free, this solar panel is going to go somewhere else, not in this community. Actually, they ended contributing. I was asking for 40%, but then we negotiated to 25%. So they contributed 25% of the cash and all the kinds that is needed, which is labor to put all of these things. And then local government contributed another 20%, and then we provided the 50%. So that's how this very first solar panel was implemented in this community. So the point here is not just about collection of the data, it's about creating a sense of ownership by talking to and engaging with a lot of stakeholders meters in this particular case. So it's a classic social technical system, but there's a technology, there's a social, but then if those social technological systems are put into this new ecosystems, there's every chances that this groundwater can be withdrawn in disproportionate amount, and that might cause sort of depletion of groundwater to a near future. So as a result of that, we are constantly monitoring the groundwater there as well. So, we collected, because we had the engineers with us too. This is what we wanted to know, or the engineer wanted to know, total dynamic head, daily discharge, solar array size, and peak sun hours, pump efficiency. Jomo and Patrick and Mahendra would be fascinated to all of these things. They might even add a few more things to collect in this, but we need to collect the data about data that is needed to make this particular system functioning, right? But that is not going to be sufficient. We also needed to collect the plan of the community, how they want to manage that water. Okay, so that's what they are making in this particular case. They are drawing their plan. Okay, and then I'm going to show you a little better picture of it. So we ended up with that exercise. We ended up like the amount of land that each household has, as well as like this number 6 on the middle, almost left-hand side of the picture shows that number 6 is a household. It has a 3 piece of land, and this is the household here. There's one land here, there's another, and another. So this guy is probably a little bit richer, but this shows, the red line shows the existing solar irrigation here and here, these 2 solar irrigations ability to irrigate, and the dashed line shows their future plan, and then little black boxes show the total households, and this little long one here shows the chicken farm as well. So this is a kind of a resource map of this particular community. Okay, and this gives us idea about, if you visit this place now, and I mean 10 years later, if I rerun this map, if some household moved away, then I can find out right there, okay, which one moved away. If some household sold the land to somebody else, it's moved in somebody else, then I can find it out right there. So that will gives us sort of how things are changing in this particular place, and then what is happening. But what it doesn't give us is their activities. Okay, so if I am then building a fancy map, I can download the Google things and then circle it, and this is the actual community that you can see here. Okay, these are the communities around the world. Depending if you are in the hills, slightly different, but this is in the plain part of the country. This is what it is. Okay, so now road and so on, a little bit of fancy map there, but I wasn't able to get a whole lot from the previous map about the cropping activities. Now we sat down with the men and women, the farmers there, and then we built a sort of an annual cropping pattern. What you see on the top part is the cropping pattern, and the bottom part is the cropping pattern after the irrigation. You are certainly seeing here, this is the dry part of the year, and then you see a little bit more crops are introduced because of the access to irrigation water here. My next venture, which I already began, is we have got a technology, we have got a community, we have got agricultural activities going on. Because of the excess of water, people are adding more crops. What is soil doing right now? Is the condition of soil is depleting because we are mining soil nutrients. Okay, so that's what I have been monitoring, and every time when I go there, I talk about replenishing soil nutrients in this particular area by either compost, farmyard manures, or some green manure crops, and so on. Because if the soil is depleted, down the road, the farmers find themselves that their crop is not giving enough return to their investment. Okay, so if you sit down with the community, what you see here is a really interesting collage of technologies, existing technologies, or a product, I will say, outcomes. So these beans are a source of protein. They are multiple different colors, and then these local farmers knows really, really well enough that quality of each of these beans and which time of the year actually they should be eating them. So on the lower right-hand side, you've got two different types of corn, at least from the color red and the white corn. These are drought-resistant corn varieties that are popularly grown in the hills of Nepal, but they are rapidly replaced by the hybrids and the modern corn, which continuously fail the people, but people, even technicians, push the technology. So there is this disconnect between the local reality and the techno-optimist that's happening here. On the top right side, what you see is the combination of corn and the bean together. As the corn is harvested, the bean then climb into these corn stalks, and in about 2 months or a month later, after the corn is harvested, the bean is ready. That is the product. But what is also happening, which farmers know really, really well, is that bean is a leguminous crop. It extracts the nitrogen from the atmosphere and it put into the soil. Whereas corn is a cereal crop. It does not extract the nitrogen. Okay, corn takes up the soil nitrogen, whereas beans give it back to it. So if you have this kind of a combination in your agriculture plot, sustainability is more or less assured. The modern agriculture doesn't know this thing. I would say they know it, but doesn't want to promote these things. So as a community development worker, it is your responsibility to actually uncover what is working at the local level, and then how to actually nurture them rather than replacing them. On the top left-hand side, what we're doing there is we are ranking the nutritional value of the fodder that people depend on during the dry seasons. We found out in every community that we go, there are more than 40 different fodder trees that they depend. So these farmers also know the nutritional value of each of these crops, fodder trees. So, we are perfectly about to finish about an hour here talking about the kind of data that needs to be collected and so on. But I also want to give you some chance to say something if you have anything burning that you want to share. Otherwise, good luck.
Sir?
Okay, I got the question. Could you please elaborate on how did you identify the area for the intervention? Well, it is not that we identified, we relied on local organizations. I do not want to go around new places to identify, okay, this is a perfect place to work, come on. And they have got a water, they have got a little lakes and so, no, that's not how it works. We have to rely on local authorities to identify the area that probably would be best for intervention. And that's probably one of the mistakes that we always do as a development worker. We try to put our emphasis on identifying areas. So in this particular case, we use the local organizations to identify an area that has been hit hard by changing climatic patterns in the last few years. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Clark, are you around?
McGilway, did you have a question?
No, it's okay.
Yes.
It's okay. I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, Netra, thanks. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate your time this morning. What a wonderful tour through a variety of different challenges that local communities face and how to think about data collection in these contexts as a kind of multifaceted, multi-method tool for really helping sustainable development and grassroots innovation take place. So thank you.
Laurie, you have anything to say? Or Derek, I see you guys unmute there.
Yeah, I was just going to add one last thing to what Clark was saying, just for the people who are working on our side. So this is a stage that we do once we get better information from the producers. It could be farmers or miners about the context, right? Then we broaden our engagement with the community as a whole. So that we can look at all the interlinkages, like between mining, when they're mining, and then there's farmland, next door, which might be polluted, have polluted soil and water because of the mining. So there's, again, that multi-layer, multi-approach. We first focus on the production system first, because that's going to be where the money is going to come to create the sustainable income that will be used for further development. But it is all integrated. We just do things, and it's separated maybe by 3 to 6 months, where we focus on the production system first, and then we integrate many of these other parts.
Yeah, that linkage is going to be really, really important in the quest of collecting data. Sometimes we forget, or we tend to overlook these interrelationship or linkages between the social system, the ecological systems, and the technological systems, and then that, if we forget that, and then we are now creating a bigger problem to ourselves, and we find ourselves always behind, a step behind solving the problem rather than solving it, moving ahead. So that's why I emphasize all of these innovations that are happening at the grassroots level. They do have one way or the other, this interlinkage is established among themselves. We better uncover them before we put something new into that place. Thank you, Laurie, for sharing that. Usman, do you want to say something? I see you unmute, or Derek also. I see you.
Sorry, I hope you can hear me, because I'm having issue with my network over here. Hello?
Yes, we do hear you.
All right. So basically, just like what we're doing here over in Kaduna, Nigeria, it's all about involving the locals. That the system use is called participatory kind of method, whereby the stakeholders are carried along together with the community in carrying out data collections, okay? So in so doing, we tend to have first-hand informations, and also being the people living at the grassroots, okay? So we get them involved in the system, and I believe after this workshop, we will enhance more on the method, because it's really giving us a positive result, okay?
Good, great, thank you, Usman. One thing that I want to add, the word participation and engagement is as fascinating as it is. What we have also observed repeatedly is that the member of the community who is a little bit outspoken, or who has a little bit of ability to articulate things, get engaged with outsiders, but those who are a little shy and who doesn't have a confidence, who think that they cannot articulate their ideas, they tend to not engage or not participate actively. So as a community, development workers, one of our job is to foster these hidden and suppressed voices to come up. Then only we can generate a better data. Otherwise, the data always come from a specific sources, meaning specific kind of people who has the ability to come forward and talk. And that is probably a reason, the women's voice has always been unable to come up in the surface, because in most cultures, they are not allowed even to come in a gathering and allowed to talk about. Okay, so this is not a new thing, but I just wanted to emphasize and put a little bit of a sort of a focus on that part. And for the 21st century development practices, we cannot allow these voices continue to be suppressed. We need to uncover them. And then there are ways to uncover. It might take time, but there are processes, there are ways to uncover these voices, and all development practitioners should be sensitive about it.
So, and I can give you an example. Usman is working with us in Kaduna, Nigeria. And so we did minor registration. They're both women and men minors. And we did make sure that we also had women working for us that were collecting data so that women could, could register, speaking to a woman. But what we found is we didn't get any of the women. But in our process, it's a long-term project. So, we have different mechanisms that would be put in place that will kind of ease them into that. But it is a very, very typical problem.
It is.
And so, and it's not something typically you can solve like in one instance. So I think that's what most people don't realize. So we do make attempts, we do open the doors, we try to put in some basic things, but ultimately they have to come to trust and feel comfortable. So our next step will be like when we do the community, we're doing like a community profile of the surrounding communities, we will probably have to interview and engage with women by themselves, right? Separate from the men to start to, see where they are and how they work and, what works best for them. But it's not just women. There's a lot of other groups, it can be the elderly widows, it can be orphans, it can be, so the effort is ongoing where you're trying to make sure that the vulnerable and the excluded are included. So
you're right, Laurie. That is one of the critical challenge. I lived in a very isolated indigenous communities for 22 months. Trust is what is lacking in every part of the world. People do not trust the government. People do not trust the NGOs. People do not trust the outsiders. And the government doesn't trust their people. So trust is one of that thing. We violated that a long time ago. It's going to take time to actually bring back and build that trust. Definitely, this is not going to come in one season or in a year. It's going to really, really take time. It took me about 6 months to build the trust in a native community, very isolated native communities. I was there for 24/7, eating, living with them, whatever they eat and so on. Even then it took me. So if we have a development practitioners who goes in and come out regularly, in that case, building a trust would be a really, really challenging thing. Someone has to invest their time literally in those communities and in those particular group that you are talking to, Laurie, to build the trust. But anyway, it seems like this is a great project that you are leading, Laurie. Good luck with everything. And Clark, thank you. We will be happy to share some of our experience and learnings as we go through.
Thanks, Netra. Much appreciated. And everybody have a great day.